thank you all for being here on this cold and rainy day. And good news, it's working! Yay! My daughter didn't have to get that call, thank goodness. It was an HDMI cord. That's all it was. So, today we have a wonderful speaker, Mr. Wade Lanning. And Wade is here, he's a volunteer through the Prince George County Heritage Center with an interest in preserving the memory of the service members from this area that made the ultimate sacrifice. I don't think I need to say anything else other than welcome, Wade.
Thank you. Okay, well, thanks for everybody coming out, like we said, on a rainy day. What I'd like to do is find out how many of you folks are been here a long time all your lives or lived here most of your lives. Most everybody, not very many newcomers. Okay, well, I just want to get a feel for that. As Susan said, I'm with the Prince George Regional Heritage Center. What I want to talk today about is a program we have that recognizes and honors the sacrifice of the families and the fallen heroes. The program is called An Honored Place. Sometimes we call this the Wall of Honor program for short, but the official name is An Honored Place. Let's see if I can make this work. Just to give you a little background, the inspiration for this program came from the monuments, both in Prince George and Hopewell, the memorial monuments. Out of Prince George, as you see here in the picture, there's two monuments in front of the Prince George County Regional Heritage Center, which is the old courthouse right across the street from Luca's restaurant. There are 51 people listed on that monument from World War I up through the global war on terrorism. The Hopewell Monument there on 15th Avenue contains 72 veterans from World War II all the way through global war on terrorism that lost their lives in the service of our country. Some are listed on both monuments, so we have, I think, about 19 on both monuments. And there are different reasons for that. Some lived in Hopewell and moved to Prince George. Also, as I understand it, I wasn't born that long ago compared to some people, like my brother back there that's eating. I understand the Prince George and Hopewell draft board was combined at one time, so they all kind of commingled when they filled out the draft report. So in 2014, the program that we call An Honored Place was established with the goal to document the lives by locating relatives or acquaintances. So if you think about the Statler Brothers song called The Wall, where the woman comes up to the Vietnam Wall, says, "My son is more than a name on the wall." What we're trying to do is find out more about these people. There's the names, but we want to find out who these people are, what they look like, and the story of their lives. So we began contacting relatives, collecting pictures, documents, other memorabilia, to try to develop their history, use a variety of information, family records, government records, numerous online sources, and anything else we can find. One document is real helpful. There's a book called The Gold Star Honor Roll of Virginians in World War II. I don't know if you have seen that or not, but this is for the whole state of Virginia. It has different localities broken down. There's also a similar book for World War I, but then it was called The Great War. And there's a book there that shows all the pictures and gives a little bit of information about them, as well as other sources. So we've made contact with about 75 families so far. Many families had quite a bit of information, pictures, as well as personal effects. They had letters that their fallen husbands or son wrote to them during the war that they served in, or conflict they served in. Purple Hearts, various documents, that they share with us and allow us to photograph and copy for our archives. So with the help of the families and the Appomattox Regional Library System, we have pictures of almost 100 fallen veterans from World War I to current global war on terrorism. Where we do not have photographs, we have at least a photograph of their headstone in the cemetery. In the case of someone who's missing in action and has no headstone, most of them have some type of memorial somewhere in the United States listing their name. So we have a photograph of their name on the memorial. So this is where we get to what we call the Wall of Honor list. The combined Prince George Hopewell Wall of Honor includes 167 fallen veterans. Now, this starts at the War of 1812 and also includes the Civil War as well as World War II to current. We also included several merchant marines as well as one civilian that died while training other servicemen. So what I'm going to do now, Susan is going to pass out a handout because I'm going to show you 7 slides. Looks like David's going to help too, with the names of these 176 people. The slides are probably going to be hard to see all the names, so you're welcome to follow through on your list. I'm going to talk about briefly a few of these as I go through the list, and then after I talk about the entire list, I want to go into more detail about a dozen individuals. So this starts off with War of 1812, goes into the Civil War. 1812 list was solely from records in the Library of Virginia. I've not found any families or have any information about these individuals. The Civil War was developed by Randy Watkins, who's on the board with the Prince George Heritage Center. He's a Civil War expert, and he has researched all this. These names, I think it's about 46, thereabouts from the Civil War. You may begin to start seeing some surnames you recognize here. A lot of these families are still in this area. Now keep in mind that Hopewell was not formed until, 1916? So up till then, all this area where Hopewell is was Prince George then. I did find one recently, distant cousin of David Butts. It turns out that he was related to the Swinefords and Fenners in the family, in the county. So we at least have one person that we know is related to them. But you'll recognize a lot of names from this area: Fig, Epps, Hare, a lot of Harrisons in this area, Marks, Pettaway, Raines, Reeves, the list goes on. When we get up to World War II, you'll probably start recognizing more surnames from this area. I'll talk about John Bulis in more detail later, but you'll see some other names. Colville, we've been in touch with their family, the Roy Ellis family, and the James Wooden family. So the ones with asterisks are ones that we've been in touch with families. World War II, again, we'll start seeing more names you'll probably recognize. Ones I have here on the screen in red are just to remind me I want to make mention of those folks. Pierre Bonteque, if any of y'all ever knew the Bonteque family in Hopewell? No one did. How many of y'all remember Malcolm Eubank? A lot of people, okay. The Bonteque family lived on Brown Street or Avenue, whatever it's called, down in the City Point area. Pierre graduated from Hopewell schools in the early 1940s, and he went to Virginia Tech for 2 years, and then he went to West Point Military Academy. What was unique is that when Mrs. Bonteque passed away, there was an album, a scrapbook that she had created for her son Pierre, started from the time he was an infant all the way up until his final days in the military. When she died, the contents of the house were sold, and someone was fortunate enough to have the presence of mind to take that scrapbook to Jeannie, who headed the library, so we have a lot of information about him. He got married on June 6, 1944. Does anybody know what that date is? It was D-Day. He got married, that was the day he graduated from West Point, and the day he got married. His wife moved back up to Philadelphia area or somewhere up that way after he went off to war, and he died following April of 1945. About 3 years ago, we had an interesting thing happen. We had an email from a lady. Mrs. Pierre's wife eventually remarried in the late 40s, early 50s, and settled in Massachusetts, Hartford, Massachusetts. We had somebody contact us that I'd never heard of before. She said, in my trunk, in my basement of my house, I have a trunk that has Lieutenant Pierre Montague written on it. It turned out it was his military footlocker. So after she had remarried, she had saved his footlocker all those years. There were some of his personal effects in there, but there was his West Point graduation diploma, there was his Purple Heart certificate, and of all things, there was a photo album from their wedding day showing all the pictures that were taken that day, professional photographs of that Memorial Day. So we thought that was pretty interesting. William Butterworth, they called him Billy Butterworth. His father was, I think, the city treasurer in the 50s. He had two sisters. He was in the Navy, and he was lost fighting in the Battle of Leyte Gulf over in the Philippines. And there's actually a book written about his particular ship that he was on, where it sunk in battle with the Japanese. He is missing in action, so his remains were never found. Going on through the list here, Henry Deschemaker had a sister, I believe, go to Hopewell schools in the 1950s and 1960s. Arnold Wayne England was one of the merchant marines that was lost. His ship that he was operating, transporting military troops to Europe, was some submarine. What's interesting about it, there was a guy named Joseph Shornack on that same ship. He was in the Army being transported to Europe. And of course, y'all know the Shornack family from around town. Linwood Harrell and Turner Harrell, they were one of the two sets of brothers that were lost in World War II. William Horak, some of y'all may have known Rudy Horak, was a cousin of his, recently passed away. Charles Johnson lived on Dinwiddie Avenue, just down the street from us when I was growing up. Joseph LaRue was another merchant marine. Daniel and Joseph McCormick were another set of brothers that were lost in World War II. James Puryear is the civilian that was lost his life training airmen down in Georgia. His sister, I believe, Bruce, is Betty Ramsey. I don't think he heard me. But his sister was, his daughter was Betty Ramsey from the Hopewell area. I'm going to talk more about Henderson, Tidsel, and Riggin here in a minute. David Rickman, a lot of Rickman boys went in the military in World War II. He had a cousin named Preston Temple that was lost in World War II. And I've got Joseph Shornack that I mentioned before that was on a transport ship that went down. So here's Preston Temple at the top, cousin Rickman boy, John Tomko. I don't know if any of y'all know Kenny Tomko from Prince George. Edward Vargo was lost on D-Day. His nephew is Buck Vargo, who's now sheriff of Prince George. And there's some others. Martin Volek was related to Wayne Hedgepath that worked at J.T. Morris. And I don't know if it's just coincidence, but there's J.T. Morris water bottle here. Maybe hope that's not a sign of what's coming from me. Then we get into Korea. Certainly in World War II, it was about 78 on our list. Korea, we have about 10. Still way too many. Shouldn't be any, but it is what it is. Just to mention about Thomas King, he did not really live here in Hopewell very much, but his sister attended Hopewell schools. His brother lived in the area for a while, and his mother lived here in the area. When I interviewed their family, I got in touch with his aunt, who was actually about 4 years older than him, and they lived in the same house growing up. She had a foot locker full of material on Thomas. She even had telephone records back into the Korea time frame of her phone bills that showed long distance calls between her and Thomas while he was in California before he was shipped out to Korea. So that was very helpful. William O'Baird was a good friend of Charlie Cormany. Some of y'all probably know Charlie. He had the sporting goods place in Hopewell. Vietnam, fairly long list there too. I want to go through and talk about some of those here shortly. There's been some recent conversation on the Memories of Hopewell Facebook page about some of the folks, particularly Draper, and back on World War II, James Louder, there was a thread about him recently. And then global war on terrorism, we had 4 people. One thing I was going to mention about the global war on terrorism, the traffic circle in Prince George, at the intersection of Courthouse Road and Allen Road, is named for Michael Carey. If you go through that traffic circle, I know it's hard to look at all the signs because there's so much traffic out there, but you'll see a sign there that says his name on it. Philip Myers, the traffic circle that's going to be built at the intersection of Bull Hill Road and Courthouse Road will be named after him. His father lives just 3 houses down from that future traffic circle, which is supposed to start construction this fall. The traffic circle at what I call the back gate of Fort Lee, I guess it's really the A Avenue gate, is named after Jesse Osbat. And then the bridge on Middle Road over top of 295 is named after Lawrence Sprader. So all these names, in addition to being on the list, they're on the Prince George Heritage Center website. You can pull up the website, and in the red strip on there, there will be a banner that says Wall of Honor. You can click on that, and then you can scroll down through all the names. Starting with World War I, there will be many names in blue. If you click on those, it will pull up a picture of that person and a short biography of that person. So that goes starting World War I all the way through global war on terrorism. Some other things we do in the program, the Honor in Place program, when we hold the Memorial Day observance at the Prince George Heritage Center, all the Gold Star families present are recognized. So we ask for a show of hands, who are Gold Star families, and then as the names are called, they come up and put a little flag on the wreath, the memorial wreath that's there. We've also written a number of memorial biographies, as we call them. So these are little booklets. So the families that have a lot of information were able to put a fairly detailed biography of their lives. And I think we've done about 16 of these. These booklets are also available for viewing on the website. I have copies, and then there are copies at the Prince George Heritage Center, so you can view them at either location. A couple other things we've done too, we've shared the pictures with the Virginia War Memorial that we've had. We've shared the biographies we've had with the Virginia War Memorial, as well as other information. And then also on that same page, the Wall of Honor list, if you go to that on your cell phone and your computer, down at the very bottom we have a list of the websites references, about 20 websites that we have referenced there. And we've also framed all these photographs that we've had, and in the past we've been able to exhibit those at the Heritage Center Memorial Day or Veterans Day, but between COVID and space limitations, we haven't been able to do that the last couple of years. So what I want to do now is start talking about some of the details of some of the individuals, give you a little bit more details of their lives. First one I'll talk about is John Bulis. How many people here knew the Bulis family in Hopewell? A few people. There was a Johnny Bulis lived out on Steel Level Road for 8 years, and he was related to them. So anyway, John Bulis was the son of Hungarian immigrants, Michael and Mary Bulis. He was working for a company called Morris Gates Company in Petersburg before entering service. He was a member of the 80th Division, which is a fairly prominent division that went to fight in Europe. He left for Europe on May 22nd, 1918, with his transport ship leaving from New Jersey. He was killed in action on October 5th, 1918, during the Battle of Argonne. That was the last major battle, one of the last major battles, and the last battle basically of World War I. World War I ended November 11th, 1918, which is now Veterans Day. His remains were not brought back. He was buried at the Meuse-Argonne American Cemetery in France. And he was survived by a number of siblings as well as his parents. So those descendants are around town. I've been in touch with one of his nieces. This one is very personal to me. And if I get a little bit choked up, forgive me. This is Jack Rosazza. His parents were Carl and Maisie Wilkes Rosazza. He was raised in Hopewell and attended Hopewell schools. He married a lady named Dorothy Kirby. We called her Dot. And they had a son named Carl Kirby. I think he's related to the same Kirby family that lived on Jackson Farm Road in the 50s and 60s. So I don't know if any of y'all know Janet Kirby, Kay Kirby. I think he was related to that family. He was working in Homer Ross, which later became Cam, Stone, whatever, all sorts of other names recently. And was living on Denwood Avenue, basically across the street from my parents when he was inducted. So he went in the Army in April 1944. His parents were from Bedford, Virginia, and he had a number of cousins up there. How many of y'all know what the Bedford boys are, who they are? Quite a few, okay. For those who don't know, the Bedford Boys was a National Guard unit in Bedford that was in D-Day, on the attack on D-Day. They put that whole unit in landing craft, or 1 or 2 landing crafts, and just about all of them were killed on D-Day. Just very few of them survived. Due to the secret and classified information where they try to keep soldiers writing home to tell family where they were located, Jack could not tell his family where he was at any point in time. So what he did when he arrived in France, he was able to locate his cousins' graves, and he wrote home, told his family that I located my cousin's graves. So they knew he was in France based on that. He was killed on December 9th, 1944 in France. His family was not notified until 4 days before Christmas. So you can imagine how devastating that was. I don't know if you can tell it in the picture. That's him with his son Carl and his wife Dot. We stay in contact with Carl to this day. He's about 1 month older than my sister, and he lives in Albuquerque, New Mexico. This picture was taken between 2nd and Main Street in the parking lot right across from the municipal building. To the right is a building called the Williams Building now, but it's where Lucky Jones has his insurance company. In the background, you can probably see some windows. That was the old Rucker department store building that's been now torn down. The family did not receive kill in action notification until January 24th, 1945. In that time frame, it was very slow getting information about people that were missing in action or killed in action. So it all came by telegram, was brought to the family's house. His remains were brought back after World War II, and he's now buried at Merchant Hope Cemetery. The policy after each World War I or World War II, and it continues on now, they allow the family to decide to bring their loved ones back or bury them in an overseas American cemetery. So in early 1945, his remains were brought back from France, where he was buried. My father was one of the pallbearers. So my father used to tell me it was just very devastating on the family, losing him right there around the holidays. Next person I want to talk about is Thomas Burney. He was the son of Neil and Rosa Burney. They lived at 2200 Lee Street, which is the intersection of 22nd and Lee Street. Any of y'all know Sue Burney from back in the school days? That was one of his sisters. He had 3 sisters and 2 brothers. The lady I mainly dealt with was his sister Nancy. Her married name was Nancy McCants. I went to see Nancy. She lives in Hampton. Went down there to see what material she had. She said she didn't know what I wanted. I got down there. She had a table as big as one of these tables, piled high with information about her son and her brother. He joined the Navy on November 30th, 1942. He was serving on a ship called the USS St. Augustine when it sank off the east coast of the United States up in the New England area on January 6, 1944. His ship was traveling at night with no lights on and actually collided with another American large ship, and the ship went down and it was lost there. The family was notified fairly quickly in this case, a few days after his passing, and then his remains were returned on January 17, 1944, and buried the same day. This photograph here is very unique. It's the only World War II photograph I've ever seen of an interment at City Point Cemetery, and with the honor guard with the flag. He was possibly the first World War II veteran buried at City Point. I don't know that for sure because I don't have those records, but that's what the family told me. Nancy told me that her and her mother would walk from their house on Lee Street to the cemetery every Sunday and put flowers on his grave. Of course, he was survived by his parents and the siblings. They recently donated the funeral flag to the picture which Heritage Center that has been mounted into a flag display box. It was on an exhibit out there at the Heritage Center. By the way, if anybody has any questions as we go along, this is informal, so feel free to ask. Next person I want to talk about is named Paul Golnick. His parents, Charles and Annie, were immigrants from Poland. You'll see a lot of this reoccurring, a lot of immigrants were coming over and their children were going off the battle. Paul was raised in Prince George and lived in Petersburg from time to time and was working in Hercules, which is what, now Ashland or something, whatever it's called. As you see in the picture, hopefully you can see it, he's got a big broad smile on his face. His family remember him as always smiling. He had an older sister and 2 older brothers. Both of his brothers were already serving in the military, so he was not obligated to go in by law. He decided he wanted to go ahead and serve, so he joined the Navy on May 9th, 1944. In this picture of him, you see he's holding a dog, and the family said the day he left for the military, the dog ran off and never came back. So they think the dog went looking for him. Don't know, but that's a possibility. The little boy beside him is his nephew. His name is Jimmy Brantley. I don't know if any of y'all know him or not. His wife, Jimmy's wife, Leah Brantley, was manager back in Southside, Virginia until she retired recently. Paul died. Paul was in the Navy, and he was a seaman in the air division or whatever it's called. I'm not sure of the proper terminology. And his plane and another plane left their base, flew over near Japan to do some reconnaissance at night. And neither plane came back the next day. They're not sure what happened to him, but you see he died on August 8th, 1945. Does anyone know the significance of that date? It was two days after the first bomb was dropped in Japan. The atomic bomb was dropped. That news was all over the media, all over the newspaper. You know, the notices that the second bomb had been dropped, and soon after that, Japan surrendered. Then the formal declaration of surrender came about. So the family's all excited, thinking their son's going to come home. And then over a month later, they get notice that he was missing in action. One of his nieces that I interviewed, Jeanette Wallace, was there at the house when the family was notified. And she said it was devastating. So he was lost in the ocean. His remains were never found. The only thing they found, he was in an airplane called a PBY. Those of y'all who have Navy experience, aircraft experience might know. PBY is a fairly large plane that carries a crew of about 11 or 12 people. Actually, it's bunks in it, has a kitchen. You can fly for up to 12 hours at a time on fuel. The only thing they ever found when they went out looking was one of the pontoons off the PBY. So they think they found the wreckage, but at that time there was nothing they could do about it. One other little story about Paul Golnick too. When he went off in the Navy, he was dating a young girl from Prince George, and they were writing letters back and forth. Of course, he went off and never came home. So she remarried. Her new husband was named Paul Munsall. You've probably heard Munsall names around. Well, she saved all the letters from this Paul for her whole life. Never told her husband that she had the letters, and then he passed away. She recently moved into a nursing home up in Richmond, and she was reminiscing about Paul Golnick. So she called the Virginia War Memorial, said, "Do you have any information about Paul Golnick?" Well, it so happens we have one of these memorial biographies about Paul Golnick. So they sent that to her. So she was able to read the story about what happened to him. Excuse me. Next person is Henderson Tinsley Riggin. He was one of the older people that was in World War II. He was born in 1911. His family lived on Lanning and Fifth Avenue. Different times he had 4 sisters, 3 brothers, and 5 half siblings, so there was a lot of family there. The person I interviewed mainly for him was his niece, Hilda Riggin. Any of y'all know Hilda from Hopewell High School? Okay. She married a guy, I think, from Hopewell, and they got divorced and later remarried. Anyway, they called him Tinsley. He joined the Navy actually in 1929 before his 18th birthday. He served on a number of ships, USS Richmond, Dallas, and was assigned to the USS Anderson in 1939. That ship mainly served on the east coast in the Atlantic until Pearl Harbor. Then it went over to the Pacific. They were involved with a number of battles over in the Pacific area, during which time the ship would come back to port in San Diego or San Francisco when he married a lady named Mary Stevens. He was another one in our list lost in Battle of Leyte Gulf. His ship was struck by a kamikaze type airplane. Not sure it was kamikaze or accident, but anyway, the plane hit the ship. He was severely injured, lived a few days, and then he passed away later on. This picture here, this is Tinsley on the left and his brother Bedford on the right. Bedford is Hilda's father, and some of y'all may know Biff Riggin that worked at Parker Grocery. So that's Bedford's son too. In fact, Biff Riggin is Bedford Riggin Jr. So the family received killed in action notice on November 28th. Let me see if I can get through this story. It was customary then that the police would escort the military people to the house to give the killed in action and missing in action notifications. In addition to Bedford, Tinsley had one other brother serving in the military. So his mother sees the military coming to the front porch. So she knows something bad is happening. She asked him, which one of my sons is it?
Can I interrupt you here?
Please.
How many people have seen Saving Private Ryan? If you remember in that movie, there's a woman who's washing dishes in a farmhouse, and the car pulls up in front, and she makes it to the porch before she collapses. That's exactly the same thing.
There were so many people dying in World War II, particularly after D-Day, that it was very common practice around Hopewell, or I would say common practice, common knowledge. If you saw the car going to the door, you knew what was going on. Hopewell's a small town now, it was even smaller then, so it got out. He's buried at in San Diego. It's called Fort Rosecrans Cemetery, which is where he was stationed out of. It's interesting, he is listed on the monument here in Hopewell, but he's not in this Gold Star book because he was married and his address was listed as San Diego. So we run into several of those situations, and Jeannie and I were talking about that earlier, where people are from Hopewell, they moved to another location, so it did get picked up in the records for Virginia. This is Paul Piskel. He He was born in late 1923. His parents were Paul and Margaret Yentrick. And you'll see his parents were also immigrants, Hungary and Austria. The family had a farm on Little Road. Then his father got a job at 2B's plant in Hopewell, so they moved into 12th Avenue in Hopewell. Sadly, his father died in an industrial accident working at 2B's. He attended the Nazareth Lutheran Church and also Hopewell schools, and he had moved down to the Tidewater area to live with his sister down there where he was working at the Naval Air Station before he enlisted. So he joined the Army in November 1943. He was one of the replacements sent to Europe after D-Day. He died in battle September 11th, 1944. His sister, who I interviewed, lived on West Broadway. Her name was Lillian Lockton. I don't know if any of y'all knew them. I know Carolyn knew her. In fact, I think you were the one who gave me the lead for her. But she told me that was their family's 9/11. And we all have the 9/11 2001, but this was their family's 9/11 day. So Paul was survived by his mother, 3 sisters, and a brother. After the war, when they offered to bring his remains back, his mother says, "If I can't see his face, let him rest in peace." So he's interred in France at the Lorraine American Cemetery. You'll see the flowers at his headstone. They were put there by a friend of his that survived World War II, a guy named Billy Bowles in Georgia, who I've been in touch with and has since passed away. But Billy every year would have flowers sent to Paul's cemetery headstone and has actually traveled over there and visited the cemetery. Now we get into Korean War. This is Larry Kennedy. He was born in 1918. His parents were Henry and Haiti Kennedy. They lived on Berry Street in Hopewell. He was the youngest of 3 boys, and he had 3 younger sisters. He joined the Army during World War II in 1943. After the war, he married a lady named Joyce Stewart, and they lived on Palm Street, which I think is a street right behind Cavalier Square, if I'm not mistaken. They lived there. He stayed in the Army Reserves after World War II and then volunteered for duty back in Korea after Korea started up. I interviewed his niece, who still lives on Palm Street, and some of y'all from the 60s era, 70s era, may have known his nephew, Michael Kennedy, who attended Hopewell schools. I don't know if anybody knew Michael Kennedy. I run into a few people that knew him. Anyway, his niece said that they took him over to Pittsburgh to catch the train to go off to the Korean War. And they stood and watched the train until it went out of sight, just waving at the train. He died March 9th, 1951 in Korea. He's one of the ones brought back and buried at City Point Cemetery. So he was survived by his wife, parents, and 3 sisters, 2 brothers, and nieces and nephews. One thing I like to make sure we always do, all these people had family, parents, wives, nieces, nephews, children. So we have to remember the service they and suffering they had to endure. This is another Korean veteran, a guy named John Dornan Meikle. Meikle, the family called him Dornan. His parents were Dave and Roma Meikle. He was born in 1933. He was raised some in Pennsylvania, and then they moved down to Prince George in the Carson area. His mother and father got divorced. His father remarried a lady named Myrtle Kane, but Dornan was very, very close to his stepmother. She was very good to him, and the family remembers him as having a fun-loving nature. So I was able to interview his two sisters and his stepmother as part of this research. They said that he would like to get down behind the bed and jump up and scare people and that sort of stuff. But he didn't like school. And his father had to sign for him to join the Army at age 17. So he joined the Army June 5th, 1950. 2 weeks later, the Korean War broke out. 6 months later, he was killed in Korea. Still had not turned 18. He was still 2 months away from being 18 years old. This picture of him, I probably can't see it, but he's wearing funny glasses and a big, thick nose. And that's his sister, Linda Nicole Anderson, who attended Prince George schools in the 60s, and that's who I mainly interviewed for this. This is another sad Christmas story. The family was notified just before Christmas 1950 that he was missing in action. He had a train set, as many boys did in that time frame, and they had the train running around the Christmas tree. So when they delivered the missing in action notification, the father went over and turned off the train, never ran it again. That train set now is with his cousins in Pennsylvania. They keep him as a memorial to him. Although they never recovered his remains, they did confirm that he was killed in action. They have witnesses to confirm that. His cousins have donated DNA, so there have been some remains brought back from Korea over recent years. So if they ever do find remains of him, they should be able to track him through DNA. He did receive a Purple Heart, and at the time that he was killed in Korea, his father was working at Fort Lee in the Quartermaster Museum. And his father and family received the Purple Heart in honor of their son. And one of the things they did at the Quartermaster Museum is they had an exhibit in history of the Purple Heart origin, which started back in the Revolutionary War. And his father used his own son's Purple Heart for the exhibit. Now we're getting up in the Vietnam era. This is Robert Lewis, born October 4th, 1940. His parents were Herman L. Lewis and Annie Lewis Rollins. He attended Mount Carmel Baptist Church. It was over here on the corner of Arlington Road and Winston Churchill Drive. They were living on Beach Street when he was drafted into the Army in 1963. His tour of duty for Vietnam started in August 1965, and he was a member of the 1st Battalion, 7th Cavalry. I bet some of you Vietnam veterans, I think 7th Cavalry was well noted as being one of the premier fighting units.
He was killed in I Dragon, the movie with Mel Gibson.
Yeah.
His name appears at the end of that.
Yeah.
He was also the first person killed in Vietnam
From Hopewell. Right. He was actually wounded in Vietnam and wrote to his family that since he was wounded, he expected to be sent home, but was returned to duty instead. And as Lee was saying, he was killed in action in November 1965, which was actually the second day of the Battle of Dragon Valley, which was, Lee, correct me if I'm wrong, I think this is one of the major first battles.
It was the first use of helicopters to
evacuate people.
To go up against North Vietnamese army.
They had some skirmishes on the ground before, but this was a major battle. Went on for about a month or so.
I don't know.
maybe longer. It was a long battle, but anyway, he was killed on the second day of the battle. There was a book written about that battle called We Were Soldiers Once and Young. And as Lee said, there was a movie made about this battle. And this book lists Robert in here as one of the casualties there. I had a hard time finding a photograph of Robert that I showed on the previous screen. All I had was a real bad copy of a newspaper article showing him. It was real poor quality. I had called the church. I had written to the church and not gotten any response at all. One day I was driving by the church and there was a man out there cutting grass. I stopped and talked to him. His name was Robert Hayes. And I said, "Did you know Robert Lewis?" He said, "I sure did." He said, "He's my brother's best friend, and my brother was one of his pallbearers when he was brought back from Vietnam for internment." His brother's name was Morris Hayes.
And our VFW post couldn't put up a banner because we wanted a picture. And so we looked everywhere. I tried to go and find, he went to school in a segregated school here, graduated from high school, and I went to find the yearbook. And when schools were integrated, they took all the yearbooks from the school and put them under the stage, and then water damage just destroyed them, so they threw them all away. So there's no record of the minority annuals from the school over on Winston Churchill.
So I told Robert we needed a good picture I told Robert Hayes we needed a good picture of Robert Lewis. And he said, "Well, let me see what I can do. I know his aunt." So I went to his aunt, and a couple of weeks later he called me. He says, "I've got a good picture of him now." His aunt looked through the family Bible and found a picture of Robert Lewis in there, so we finally had a good quality photograph. And I worked with Dave to help get a banner made for him for display in downtown Hopewell. So he was survived by his parents and grandparents and many aunts and uncles. So it was really a fluke, and we had a number of these situations like that where just by chance just running into the right person was able to find a photograph or some information about somebody. Thanks for that insight, Lee. This is another one that's close to me. This person is not on the monument here in Hopewell, although his family lived in Hopewell. This is Vesa Alakubi. He was born in Finland in 1941. His parents were Levi and Eva Alakubi. Mr. Alakubi, Levi Alakubi, was an officer in the Finnish military fighting the Russians during what's called the Winter War. And he was one of the guerrillas that would go out and attack the Russians that were trying to come in and take over Finland. So he had to, Mr. Alakubi was on the hit list basically from Russia. So they had to leave Finland in a hurry. And the whole family escaped over here in the United States in the late 40s. Eventually, a book was actually written about Levi Alakubi. It's titled Guerrilla Lieutenant Levi Alakubi. He was awarded the Knight of the Mannerheim Cross, which is basically the same as Medal of Honor here in the United States. Anyway, Levi joined the U.S. Army. He had to start back off as a private. Ended up getting stationed before Lee and lived next door to my parents. Vesa was attended American schools, but not here in Hopewell. He attended various military schools around the country. But he did have a younger sister named Lena, who attended Hopewell high schools in the early 60s. Don't know if any of y'all remember her or not. She was just there a few years. Vesa ended up going to West Point, graduating in 1963. And when he was sent to Vietnam, he was in the 2nd Battalion, 3rd Infantry. He was killed on May 14th, 1968. He was awarded the Bronze Star, Silver Star, as well as the Purple Heart. He had a son born while he was in Vietnam. He never got to see that son in person. He did get to see photographs of him. And Bruce and I stay in touch with that son to this day. His name is Kurt Alakubi. At the time, the family was living in Seattle, Washington, and that's where he is buried at now. He was survived by his parents, his wife, his son, his stepdaughter, and his parents. One sad thing about this, and Bruce may correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding that his father rose to the rank of lieutenant colonel, was in Vietnam at the same time his son was killed. When his son was killed, he got notification, and his father actually prepared him for burial. Cleaned him, put him in a dress uniform for burial. You see, he had a stepdaughter. Besa had a girlfriend while he was in Germany, an American girl who was the daughter of an American soldier over there. And they later, after she got divorced, they got reconnected. She got married and had a daughter, and Besa married her, and so the stepdaughter came along with the marriage. Now we're getting up into the global war on terrorism. This is Jesse Osbat. He was born in 1984 in Michigan. His parents were Aaron and Cynthia Osbat. They recall him as being a very determined youngster. They lived several places while his father was in the military, and they ended up settling in Prince George in 1995. He graduated from Prince George in 2002, went to attend Virginia State University, graduated there in 2006, where he was in the ROTC program. He married his high school sweetheart, a girl named Danielle Evans, same year that he graduated from Virginia State. He told his father that he wanted a military career so his little brother would not have to go in the military. So he joined the Army as soon as he graduated from Virginia State. He served in Iraq and Afghanistan, was sent back to Afghanistan in 2012 for another tour, where he was killed in action there. He's interred at Blandford Cemetery, which is survived by his wife, his parents, his sister, little brother, as well as grandparents. Last I heard, his mother was working at Beasley Elementary School, so you might, if anybody has any contact with Beasley Elementary School, you might run into her out there. This is Lawrence George Sprader Jr., they called him Jr. He was born in 1982 at Belvoir. His father was a Vietnam veteran in the Army, and his parents were Larry and Lee Sprader. He grew up in Northern Virginia and Korea, which is where his mother was from. They came to Prince George in 1990. He attended various schools in Prince George and graduated in 2000 from there. One of his favorite things was playing video games with his younger brother, Chris. So he joined the Army right out of high school, and he said one of his fondest memories of his son, Junior, was coming home at Christmas time and surprising his mother. Y'all may have heard about the situation. He was on a training exercise in 2007, Fort Hood, Texas. And it was supposed to be a realistic training situation. They went out in the desert, survival type skill training, and he expired during that training. What was really sad, they did not go looking for him for several days. So by that time, it was too late. He's interred at the Virginia Veterans Cemetery in Amelia and survived by his parents, as well as brother, sister-in-law, and 2 nephews. As I mentioned before, the bridge over 295 on Mill Road is named after him. His parents, until his father passed away, his parents lived in Brick House Estates, I believe it's called, out there on Mill Road. So that summarizes all the people I want to talk about today. I could go on for a long time about a lot of the folks, but we don't have time today. But I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the future for the project, the Honor and Place project. We still are missing some pictures, so we hope to be able to continue collecting pictures. John came up to me right before this and said he may have a lead on somebody that didn't have a photograph of or information of. We still want to collect memorabilia. We've had a number of families donate material to the museum where we're keeping it to the Heritage Center and write more memorial biographies. One thing we want to do is expand the memorial exhibit to other locations, which would include pictures of the fallen. Right now, what we're having to do, because of space limitations, I have all the photographs in a large notebook, and we can pass that around. Folks can take a peek at it if they want. So these photographs are the same ones that we have framed in the exhibit from time to time at the Heritage Center. What we'd like to do is maybe have some kind of permanent, maybe a rotating, a mobile exhibit that we can take from various venues. Jeannie's told me that they would like to have something like that at the library. One of the main things they want to do is have a new memorial garden out at the Prince George Heritage Center. The monuments at Prince George Heritage Center are basically a couple of gravestones that they've actually had people come up and say, who's buried up front? Well, it's no one's buried there, it's just names on the headstone. So they want to move away from that and redo it and have a complete new memorial garden out there. We still use some help with things, locating families of other fallen veterans that we haven't. In that list I gave you, the ones that we've contacted have an asterisk beside them, so names that do not have an asterisk are families that we have not been able to find a contact. Some of the names have a pound sign beside it. Those are ones that we need photographs of. We'd like to continue collecting material for the biographies and be able to make sure that material is not lost to history. What's happened with some of these families is we go to them and they say, do you have anything of your relative that was lost in World War II or Korea or whatever? And they say, well, yeah, we did, but it was in my parents' house, up in the attic. And when the house was sold, all that stuff was left in the attic, and don't tell them where it is now. We had another family who had material in their attic and the trunk. They sold the house and told the buyers who were going to come back to get the trunk. And by the time they got back, people had thrown the trunk into the trash. So they lost all those letters, Purple Heart, all the documents, all that information. So we'd like to try to collect that kind of information. If the families can't keep it, the Heritage Center will store it. We'd like to be able to write more of these memorial biographies that we're showing you. You're welcome to come here and look at these and see the format. If anybody would like to help write this type of information, you're welcome to do so. And then if anybody has a passion for building exhibits or designing exhibits, we can always use help with that as well. A few things I'd like to leave you with. Just remember, we observe Memorial Day once a year. What I found is that the families, Memorial Day is every day event for them. Even from World War II, the families do not go and pass a day without remembering their lost one family. I'd like you to take time to visit the War Memorial Monuments, either in Hopewell and Prince George. What you might do when you go take your cell phone, pull up the Wall of Honor page, as you see the names click on their name on your cell phone and pull up a picture of that person while you're there looking at the monument. Or do the same if you go to, say, City Point Cemetery and see somebody's name. See if they're on the War Memorial Wall of Honor list and take a look at their information. This would not be possible without the help of a lot of people. Carol Bowman, who's the executive director at Heritage Center, she's been the force behind this as far as obtaining funding for the printing and a lot of the other stuff we do, and making sure everything moves smoothly. Jeannie Langford helped a lot. She found a lot of photographs and articles in Hopewell News and other newspapers that I didn't have access to that was real helpful. Carolyn Foxworth, she helped with a lot of initial research and built a spreadsheet that I still use to this day to keep all these people listed in order. Charlie Hunter and Dave Harless have given me very valuable military information about how the military works and all the ins and outs. My wife Phyllis, who has gone with me to cemeteries, to families, libraries, different places, helping me do the research. Andy Pettick, who has built the flag box for the Bernie flag and built some other items and helps at the Heritage Center, and many, many others, not to mention all the families that help. Of the families I've talked to, all of them are very, very grateful that we've come looking for them and trying to document their loved ones. One or two families are private and they have not been rude to us, but they just not have participated, but they've not been ugly about it whatsoever. So anyway, that's all I had. Anybody have any questions or anything they want to ask?